Steampunk cowboys versus supernatural bloodsuckers. Evil West is that. Vampires versus cowboys. It's myths from the ancient West twisted up until they bleed out creatures that look like zombies, but only after Del Toro's got in there and added some of his own Hellboy to the mix. Flying Hog Games is bringing this to us soon, and I got a ton of time with a couple levels in the game, diving in, checking things out, working my own way through hordes of enemies, and consistently asking myself, what would happen if Clint Eastwood crossed with Constantine? Because that's pretty much what Evil West is. Let's see how this did as a preview. Thanks to Focus for the actual B-roll for this and access to the game. It's always good to check things out a little bit early. If you want to check things out early, check out the Patreon, check out my channel, subscribe. Let's begin this thing. Evil West is something that is both a bit different and a bit of a reminder of how popular magic and mud-covered cowpokes have been lately. A threatening darkness has spread across the American frontier. One of the last remaining agents of a top-secret institute dedicated to fighting vampires. You stand between mankind and a new ancient evil that's emerged from the shadows. You become a superhero of the Wild West. You destroy the vampire menace and save the country. Or you die in between. We'll just have to see. This is third-person action combat, like God Hand a bit, but I'd like to call it Devil's Foot, because while you can punch here, you got these massive metal fists pistoning into enemies like you're punching bag effort meter at some kind of fair, but it's the kick that rocks. You can just throw out your massive boot whenever you want, place it solidly in the split-bone sternum of a bad guy that's wanting to take a taste of the good guy. I really enjoyed that up-close combat that this thing has. It's got the ability to piston away with punches and some very basic combos, but as well as doing a lot of distance fighting that the game really does seem about. For example, you have an assortment of weapons that you can get. Many of them reach out and kill people from a long ways away. You got rifles to handguns to augments to your gauntlets themselves. And this game, as you begin to play it, feels a little bit more like God of War 1876 than it really has any right to. It's the feel of the character and the weight that he has. Now, switching between these different weapons is actually pretty effortless. You also have a couple skill groups that you can go and buy from as you continue to level up in the game. These alter things like damage done. They do add some special moves like the ability to slam the ground and send out electricity like Thor, and some other ones. It is Wild West with the dirt and grit and unwashed cowhands exploring the darkness of the supernatural, though. So expect those kind of locations and certainly those kind of archetypes. The mix speaks to me, though. I've always loved this stuff. Rolling out that double doom of a 12-gauge shotgun, splitting the center of a large group of enemies in front of you. Satisfaction in fruiticide form. That is what these kind of games offer, and I've always enjoyed that. Co-op is in the game. I did not get to experience it, but if you want to grab a Sally Joe or a runaway kid and leap into the game and quad hand it through the game, you can do that. Besides, every Lone Ranger needs a Tonto. Now, speaking of side characters, you do see a couple here, as I spoke about before, helping to flesh out the story and move it forward, and many times take on the secondary helper kind of motivation that you need within some of these levels, because a lot of the levels have bits of platforming that you can do, as well as some puzzles that are very basic for you moving items to get to a new location, and that kind of thing. And so having that character there to give you hints or to just be there and sort of push that story forward is something you will see. I'd be very interested to see if that character's there in the co-op, though. For the combat itself, it's actually fine. It's got a number of options. You can quick slap some revolvers, load them up into an enemy, or you can zip off their heads with these large caliber rifles you get. You can also punch the enemy's ticket pretty quickly with those gauntlets. And one of the better parts of this game is that you don't feel like you're out of sorts, regardless if you're mid-range, long-range, or short-range. All of the weapons do a lot of damage. It's what the enemies can do against you that can actually end up causing you to have to move around. Instead of those type of games where you always feel like the up-close combat is last, or the ranged is last, this is a title where I never really felt out of sorts, regardless of what weapon I had. For example, the shotgun's on a cooldown, so you can whip out the shotgun, blast away, and then put it away, and as the cooldown slips away from that, take out some enemies with your revolvers and switch to your rifle, all very slickly. No real issues there. When it comes to powers, you do have a couple. You do have the ability to buy more, and I got to test a lot of those out, and they feel very powerful. These are powers that when you pull them off, a lot of times they're either outright killing enemies or they're doing some serious crowd control. For example, I had the ability to pull enemies towards me with the electricity gauntlet, and once you pull an enemy towards you, you can actually shock other enemies. I also added electricity to the revolver at a station that lets you upgrade weapons, and once I started firing that, it not only took that revolver to the next step in damage, but that electricity wicks off into other enemies and slows them down. And this can be vital if you've just used a shotgun and you really probably want to use it again, but you got a bit of a cooldown. You can now roll out the revolver and slow some people down, or take some headshots with the rifle and switch and really move around without any real slowdown. But I do want to talk about the speed and the movement. The way this feels, there is a plodding feel to it. It's not unwieldy, but it's got that weight of a character who's probably wearing 35 pounds of metal and mysterious items that let him add electricity gunshots and smash demons in the face without worrying about losing his own. I like the way it feels. I do want to know how it's going to feel, though, within real busy combat, because you do find yourself spinning in place a lot. The game also has some indicators to tell you that enemies are behind you and around you. I noticed with 3D audio, I could usually tell that they were there, and you can turn that off in the options. You'll probably want to, it's in the B-roll at some places, though. The levels themselves are showing a good deal of variation, but I want to see the entire game because I want to see how spread out these are. One of the biggest issues these games have is that many times they don't want to go into full cities due to their gameplay style and their fiction, which makes sense, but at the same time, that restricts the battles and locations to outlaw bandit camps and just outlaw lands, mines, small forts, which really overall start to feel not too different from one another. And I would like to see that branch out. Now, graphically, this game is solidly in the B class. You will notice at parts it actually looks much better, and at other parts it certainly does remind you that this is a title that is probably not your AAA title with a bunch of polish. There's a couple issues with the animations, and certainly some shortcuts here and there, as well as the character himself looking a little bit stoved up, like maybe he hurt his back on a long horse ride, and now he can't bend at the waist as much as he probably should be able to. You'll also notice that with upgrades and different items that you collect around the game world, there's not a lot of animations for those. Most of them you're just hitting a button and you see a smattering of gold coins fly out. I did like that in some locations there's these treasure chests, and to open them you just smash them with your gauntlet, and that was actually very cool. I was not expecting that. It does seem like you would check the lock first, but you don't. You just punch the top in, which I guess that makes sense in a world as violent as this. And it's going to be interesting to see how they merge that violence with this third action gameplay, as well as the camera and how zoomed in or out it is. The big question here is, how will it handle large-scale battles without flailing around, making the player feel like they can't find their way out of the center of a demonic mosh pit, and get some clarity on who or what to take out first when it comes to enemies. On the other hand, there are large explosive piles laying, well, just about everywhere, obviously stacked by suicidal builders that you can take out, lighting enemies on fire or sending them flying into the air if they are too close to them. You also have a lot of flying enemies and a lot of on-the-ground enemies, and a good mix of them. This is one of those titles, though, that does definitely feel like you're going to be able to probably pick out when a battle is coming, something that a lot of Devil May Cry games have had issues with in the past, where you sort of know this is an area where bad guys are going to come out, we're going to have to do these things, and the game certainly, at least in these levels I've seen, does point out those spots. You pretty much notice it right away from a graphical effect that happens and some different stuff that happens in the cutscenes. Speaking of cutscenes, there was a couple glitches here and there because this is a game that isn't fully done, but there were more than I was actually expecting. A lot of them involving characters that you actually ran up against and ended up talking to in the game world and different stuff that they did. And I think that those kind of moments, as long as they don't break up the combat too much, might elevate that feeling of polish in this a little higher than it probably is right now. But again, what I've played and what I enjoyed, this definitely skews on the action side, where we have a lot of these titles coming out that are mixing the supernatural and Western. I've always wanted an action title that does this thing. So we're finally getting that from Evil West, and I personally believe Flying Hog Games is one of the few companies that can probably handle this just right. I'm going to want to see how those larger battles occur, how that all plays out, if the graphics can stay well above where they should be when it comes to just how many FPS you're getting a second. I didn't really have any issues on the version that I played, but we're going to definitely want to see that and how it all plays out. But so far what I saw looks like a solid title right in the middle of what they were aiming for. We'll just have to see if it fulfills all of my dreams and hopes when it finally comes out. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, give it a thumbs down. Check out the Patreon if I've saved you any money. We've got an awesome patron. You can jump in, or Patreon, as people get mad. We've got awesome patrons, is what I should say. So we've got awesome patrons, but it's a great place. You can come in there, you can stream some games, play some D&D with people. We talk about audiobooks, movies, got a Mid-Journey AI art channel that we're all using. I would love to have you jump in, but if not, no matter what, peace out. Subscribe. Enjoy the rest of your week.